What's up, guys? Do you guys do, like, participation, or do you just want to listen to me talk the whole time? Like, can I ask you questions and you'll actually answer back?
Oh, you're recording?
Awesome, cool. So, yeah, my name's Stan. I founded an apologetics ministry called Exploring Reality. I primarily work in fields of philosophy, metaphysics, a lot of big words like ontology, epistemology, physics, stuff like that. And I've recently started actually transitioning into like New Testament history and all sorts of other stuff. So my primary fundamental goal when I do apologetics now is I work with some of the top academics in the field in terms of consciousness, all sorts of stuff. And I try to translate the scholarship into words that most people can understand, because if you guys have ever listened to a scholar talk about anything, it sounds like gibberish. So today we're going to talk about Jesus as the only solution to the problem of evil. Sorry. So, does anybody know what the problem of evil is? Everything? Okay. Go ahead. Sin. Okay. What else? Adam and Eve. Okay. What about them? Okay. Cool.
Worldliness.
Say it again.
Worldliness.
Okay.
Humans.
Okay.
Rebellion.
Okay. So we're talking about a lot of different things. Like the core thing here is there's evil in the world, and we might struggle to reconcile, how can Christianity be true when there's evil in the world, right? And so there's two questions that are really popular in the culture today that you might get asked. One is, why Christianity amongst all these other religions? And the other question is, how can Christianity be true with all the suffering and evil in the world? Now, when I was asked if I was going to talk here today, I was given an option of picking between one of these two, but I actually think that these two questions are so interrelated because I think Jesus is the only answer to the problem of evil. So, we're going to answer both of those questions tonight. Has anybody struggled with the problem of evil before? I have too. I actually used to be an atheist most of my life, and that was the problem of evil was the big thing for me. I just could not reconcile a perfectly loving God with evil existing in the world. So the goal today really is we have this question, the problem of evil, and way over on the other side you have the answer, but I'm not capable of jumping that far, especially in my weakened state right now. I'll die, and I'm assuming most of you guys would too. So we have to build a bridge to the other side, and that's where we're going to find that answer. Now the question is, well, how do we build that bridge? We'll get to that. The first thing we're going to have to actually go into a little bit more is, what is the problem of evil? So we brought up a few different things here, like the fact that there's sin in the world, there's evil in the world, but how do we make that more explicit? And so, generally, there's two problems of evil. There's the logical formulation, and then there's the emotional, or what philosophers would call the existential problem of evil. Does anybody know what the word existential means? Just take a crack at it.
The overall issue.
Okay. Yeah, just there's this existence question, how do I find meaning and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So, the logical problem of evil, really we're just asking this question. How can an evil and a perfect God both exist at the same time? Has anybody ever asked that question, or has anybody had that question asked to you? Mm-hmm. Cool. So, generally, here's the basic argument. Does anybody know what a deductive argument is?
A what?
A deductive argument.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Okay, cool. So, the basic idea of a deductive argument is you have premises and a conclusion. The premises are just sentences, right? And so the basic argument somebody might make against God's existence is like this. Premise 1, if God exists, evil would not exist. Premise 2, evil exists, and the conclusion is, therefore, God does not exist. That's the argument, right? The conclusion, if those two premises are true, would be logically inescapable. So the only way to disprove that argument would be to show that one of those two premises are false. Does that make sense? Cool. So, that's the basic argument for the logical problem of evil. Then we have this other thing. It's called the emotional problem of evil, or like I said, the existential problem of evil. You're asking questions like, how can I find meaning in my suffering? Does God actually care about my suffering? Is there any hope in my suffering? Stuff like that. And amongst philosophers, this is the harder question to answer. Most of the time, because philosophers tend to be like really analytic, and we tend to be kind of more like robots. We just think and don't feel too much. I'm a little different. Ever since I have kids, I have more emotions now. So you're in luck. So my kids really softened me up. So again, I'm just trying to remind you of our goal here. We want to build a bridge of reason to the answer to the problem of evil. And so, like any construction site, we're going to ask the question, like, well, how do we build this thing? We can't just start throwing things at it and hope that we can cross, because if we build a bad bridge, it's going to fall on us, and we're going to fall and die. We don't want that. So, we have a building material number 1 for the bridge. Am I in your guys' way over here? Okay, cool. I like to pace a lot. I move a lot. I'm so sorry. First, we have what philosophers would call defense. Okay? So, with regards to the problem of evil, defense is just something to show that it's rational to believe in God, even in the absence of an explanation of the evil and suffering. Right? In other words, we're not giving an explanation in terms of defense at this point. A defense is merely just showing that one of those premises are going to be false, even without an explanation for God's allowance of evil. Does that make sense? Just nod your head, yes. That's okay. Cool. So, building material number 2 is theodicy. Has anybody ever heard of the word theodicy before? Okay. Cool. I see. Yeah, Sarah, I know you. Theodicy, at the end of the day, is just a story or an explanation for why God might allow some particular evil, right? A theodicy can just focus in on one type of suffering or evil that you look into the world, or an all-encompassing story. And a little history thing here is theodicy comes from the Greek word for justifying God. Those are our 2 problems, and then we're going to cover just kind of like the traditional responses to this now, okay? Typically, we have a free will defense, and we have like a greater goods theodicy. That's like the traditional route for the problem of evil that people go through. So, remember that a defense is just something that shows that it's logically like comprehensible. It's not, you're not irrational for believing that God exists even in light of suffering. And so the first thing we're going to cover is like what's called the free will defense. This actually became famous, I think, in the 80s, because a Christian philosopher named Alvin Plantinga pretty much paved the way for the discussion for the problem of evil. And so basically think about it this way. When we look at this robot, can this robot make its own choices? No. Yeah, it's just based off of inputs and outputs, right? It doesn't have it doesn't have like freedom. It can't make choices. It's determined to act a certain way. So if it's determined to act a certain way, can we make value judgments about its actions? Like if the robot had an input that told it to chop my head off right now, could you guys be like, oh, that was evil, he shouldn't have done that? Would it like make sense to say that? No, because the robot had no other choice. It was causally determined to do that, and it didn't make like a conscious choice to do it. Can it love? No. Yeah. Exactly. So, this is where I'm going to make a claim. I'm going to say that true value comes from freedom. And if you're skeptical about that, I'm going to give you a little thought experiment here. Yeah, I figured people would like ramen. I love ramen too. So, here's the thought experiment. I just want to like poke at your guys' intuitions here. And I think you'll feel the gist of this. Here's scenario number 1. My wife's love language is like quality time together. I'm a workaholic. And so I tend to work more than I should, probably all the time. And I don't pay attention to my family as much as I should. I work way too much, and that's just kind of conflict, right? But scenario 1, I'm like, okay, I need to take a day off of work. No more philosophy, no more history, nothing. I'm just going to take the day off. I'm going to take my wife and kids to the zoo. That's scenario 1. Pretty simple, right? Scenario 2, my wife does some like weird witchcraft stuff and puts a potion in my ramen that causally determines me to spend time with her. Say what? Say face. I said face. Okay, so those are our 2 scenarios. Here's the question. which one of those scenarios is more valuable?
Free choice.
Say what?
Free choice.
Free choice? You say free choice. Who says, raise your hands, who says free choice? Okay. Who says causally determined? All right.
Argument for it. There might be a better experience.
Yeah, the answer is obviously scenario one. We can feel that, right? So there's something about like a free choice that makes something valuable, right? So that claim that I just made, that like true value comes from like moral freedom, is true. We can accept that. But if value comes from moral freedom, then we must be free. But if we're free, then we must be able to choose evil in the first place. Or we must be able to choose not God or any of these other things. In order to have moral value as humans, we must be able to choose evil over good, love over hatred, right? So why is this important? Remember that deductive argument. Who thinks that what we just talked about attacks premise 2? Raise your hand. Who thinks that what we just talked about attacks premise 1? There's your cheat code, right? The basic idea here is the atheist is going to say something, wants to say that if God exists, evil would not exist. But if God is after value, a valuable, loving relationship with you, and not forcing you to love Him, this premise is not true. Because you have to be free in order to choose to love Him. But in order to be free, necessarily, you have to be able to choose evil. So, right from the get-go right now, we could just leave, right? It's over. But we can actually take it a step further. Because just because this argument is logically invalid, there's still other forms of the problem of evil that we can talk about. And I still want to explain some different reasons why evil might exist in the world right now that it still allows it. So, now we're going to building material number 2, theodicy. And I might just hold this actually. So, the greater good is theodicy. The basic idea here is evil and suffering in the world allow for second order goods only possible if evil and suffering exist. I have a list of them that I'll go through, but does anybody have any ideas of what some of those goods might be? What's in it? Go ahead, Elias.
Sacrificial love.
Yeah, sacrificial love is a great one. I have to be, like, in order to sacrifice, something has to come to my detriment, right? That some sort of suffering I'm going to have to incur. But that's like a really good virtue, self-sacrifice. I mean, Jesus did that, right? So, that's a really good one. Anybody else?
Salvation.
Salvation, yeah. In order to be saved, which is a valuable thing, right? Think about the beauty that comes from the story of salvation. But in order to have to be saved, we have to be in a depraved state. That's a really good one too. I like that. Other examples are going to be things like forgiveness, right? In order for me to like exemplify the virtue of forgiveness, I have to be wrong in the first place. It doesn't make sense to forgive somebody for doing the right thing and giving me $1 million, right? I forgive you for giving me $1 million. Yeah, like that doesn't make sense. The next thing that I talk about is selflessness. Kind of like what Elias talked about, right? In order to be selfless, I have to give up something. In order to give up something, I'm gonna suffer a little bit. I'm gonna suffer a loss. But selflessness kind of is a really cool thing. I love being selfless. It's cool. Bravery and courage. I like this one. Think about, has anybody ever had to be brave in here? Yeah. Now, in the face of that moment, something scary was in front of you, necessarily. Otherwise, you're not exuding bravery, right? You're just doing something. So, scary moments where, like, you might get hurt, but you're doing the virtuous thing by jumping in front of a bullet to somebody, or whatever it is, right? Like, exuding bravery, that's a valuable virtue. It's another thing that God would want us to be able to do, and that's why He might allow some dangerous scenarios. In soul building, it's no secret that struggle allows for moral character development. Has anybody ever been through something really tough? Have you come out of that tough situation thinking like, wow, look, that made me kind of tougher, or that made me more gracious, that made me more merciful, and I learned a lot out of it? Mm-hmm. Yeah? I have a lot of times. And the cool thing about soul building is the fact that this is also a very valuable thing. I actually, at least retrospectively, I'm really happy for the suffering that I've gone through. Even the suffering that I go through today, I'm kind of enjoying it because I know it's producing in me something that is worth it. And I'd rather kind of go through that with God step by step than have God just magically poof me into this perfect person. I actually like this process of being molded by God, right? Rather than just being perfect. I'm not perfect, but maybe. I don't know. Anyway, so remember our goal here. Those are the traditional responses. And defense and theodicy, in my opinion, only get us here. Do you guys have any idea why I might say that?
You need a leap of faith.
You need a leap of faith? Okay. Anything else? Okay. So, there's a missing piece to our bridge. I don't want to take a leap of faith. That's just not my style. If you want to take one, I'm all for it. I'm not like that. We didn't answer this problem, the emotional problem of evil. Where we ask questions again, like how can I find meaning in my suffering? Does God even care about my suffering? And defense and theodicy here don't help, right? We got to this logical conclusion that okay, this argument doesn't work. But there's something missing, and I'm sure as I'm talking about this so far, you guys probably feel it. There's something here that's calling out to. It's saying something is missing still. Does anybody agree with that or disagree?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
What makes Jesus the answer?
I'll get there. That's what we're going to talk about. So, before we get into this, a lot of, one of the main objections I get before, talking about this kind of stuff is typically the idea that logic and emotion aren't at war with each other. If you're either a logical person or you're an emotional person. And that's true, but logic and emotion are not at war with each other. I think God has created us to be using reason, but also our emotion. Now, this is some philosophy here, so if this is really analytic and I'm losing you here, just ask me, okay? Just interrupt me and ask away. Basically, here's my argument. I think emotions are an extension of our capabilities of reasoning. And the reason I think that is this. Reason, whenever we use it, for instance, we're talking about propositions, right? So for instance, if I say the sentence 2 + 2 = 4, that's true. When I'm using reason, I'm talking about things that have truth now, right? Also, reason, we're talking about things that, objects, the cat is cute, the cat is the object, right? When it comes to emotions, we kind of have the same thing. Our emotions, if we express them in sentences, they still have propositions that have truth in them. I feel like bullying him is mean. Well, the fact that bullying him is mean is a true statement. So even our emotions that expressed in propositional content, it has truth in it. Same with them having objects. When I say that sentence, the objects are I and him. And so that's just kind of my short argument for why emotions and reason work together. Our emotions and our intuitions are going to help us to finish this bridge. So, here's building material number 3. Jesus. The incarnate second person of the Trinity who lived a perfect life, died for our sins, rose from the dead, provides us with the final construction block for our bridge. Now, your question was, how does Jesus do this in a way that nobody else can, right? There are 3 things that I think Jesus uniquely offers that no other religious conception can. And I think the things that Jesus offers are the only things that you can offer to solve that emotional existential problem of evil. First is the incarnation. Does anybody know what the incarnation means? Okay. Go ahead.
Living again, basically?
That's reincarnation. Go ahead.
Like God became something.
Yeah, God became man, right? That's Jesus. And so we serve a God who doesn't sit idly by, right? When we talked about defense and theodicy, we started talking about a distant God who just allows things, and he's not involved in our suffering, right? But with the incarnation, we run into something very unique. We have the God of the universe, the sustainer of all of reality, not just like talking to us from a distance or like letting us pray to him or anything like that. He actually took on human flesh and participated not only just in humanity with us, but participated in suffering with us. And you might be wondering, okay, so why is that a big deal? If you guys know anybody that's seen combat in the military, I know a few people, they have some of the closest bonds you will ever see. It's unbreakable. And the reason why is because they went through so much trauma together that it built a tight relationship that you and I could never build without that sort of just traumatic experience. Now, none of you guys are soldiers that have gone through combat. So here's another example that might be more relatable. Who here has played sports or is in the team or anything or used to play sports? Cool. Does anybody know what conditioning is? It's fun, huh? Yeah. Okay. So, when you're doing conditioning, think about this. I have a distinct memory, kind of like with one of my high school best friends when I played football, doing Indian runs, and really, really rough. I hated those. And I'm like on the verge of puking, and I don't want to stop. And I remember just like looking over at my best friend that was on my team at the time. And as we're running, we like meet each other's gaze, and it's like, I love you, bro. This really sucks. I want to stop. But you're going, I don't want to stop. And there's like just that moment of acknowledging we're both going through this together. We're both not going to give up. And we didn't even talk, right? It's just all eye contact. It's all through eye contact. We know exactly what the other person is thinking because we're feeling the exact same thing they're feeling because we're both doing the same exact thing. In the same way, Jesus did that with us. Now, Jesus and I don't get to see each other face to face. I don't get Christophanies every single day, right? But the whole entire point here is that we have a God that we can relate to. Because he is again joined in our human experience, joined in our human suffering. And so, again, he doesn't sit idly by. He participated in humanity with us and in suffering with us. The next thing I want to talk about is atonement. Who knows what atonement is? Go for it.
Like God making persons right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Yeah, God making persons right, the right relationship between God and man. Go ahead.
Like paying the debt.
Paying the debt. I love it. Yep. So, the atonement. Now you might be wondering, okay, how does this solve the problem of people? That existential problem of people. One is, well, again, the accomplishment of reconciliation between us and him. We are sinful creatures in need of redemption. God provides a pathway for that. And so I'm going to argue that there's four main aspects that are important for this particular topic. The first is the moral exemplar aspect of atonement. Okay. So the basic idea here is that Jesus serves as a model of moral excellence for us. And he demonstrates how we should be participating in the redemption of the universe, right? Through his actions. He tells us and teaches us and even shows us how we can overcome evil and suffering through our own actions. And by following Jesus' example, we can overcome evil ourselves and align ourselves with God's purposes. Next, this is one of my favorites, is the defeat of death and evil. I think this is one of those things that really amps me up. The basic idea here is that Jesus' resurrection, his death, burial, resurrection, it wasn't just this idea that we got forgiveness of sins, but also it's the idea that he's broadcasting to everybody, us in the spiritual world, that sin and death do not have the final word. He's saying death is defeated, sin is defeated. You get to participate in that victory with me. And we're invited to enjoy that with him. Then there's this satisfaction aspect of atonement. This addresses the demands of justice by taking the consequence of human sin, and that would be death. And what does this do? This opens us up to a right relationship with God. It opens us up to the right to participate with Him in His victory. It opens us up to redemption. And because of this, Jesus bears the weight of evil and suffering, which displays God's infinite love for us. Now, I'm going to come back to some emotional stuff and logical stuff with this one, the love aspect of the Atonement. I'm going to talk about the logical thing first. So, the basic idea here is in order for God to be perfect, He must exude perfect love. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah, okay. But I'm going to argue that perfect love demands the exuding of self-sacrificial love. Right? The only way for a perfect God to really exude a loving self-sacrifice, though, is by taking on the limited nature, the incarnation, sacrificing Himself, atonement, for someone He loves, us. Now, Jesus is the only one that's ever done that. There's other religions where they'll have demigods or pagan deities that are spatio-temporal, right? They live and they die. They're not the God of the universe. There's little pagan deities like that that people try to argue have done these things. But Jesus is the only one that it says, I'm the God of the universe, and I've done this for you. On the emotional side of this, I'm going to just put this really bluntly. The God of the universe did this for you, and I just want you to stop and think about that for a second. At night, does anybody here like stargazing? Cool. I love stargazing. The universe is just fascinating, okay? If you look at the pictures of the Hubble Space Telescope, and all these awesome pictures of the universe itself, we haven't even examined all of the universe, right? All of that is sustained and created by God. The person that is responsible for all of that did something like this for you. Now, if this doesn't really hit for some reason, I want to give you guys just another thought experiment that might help with this. Somebody give me an idol of yours, somebody you think is super cool.
Yeah.
Who?
Oh my God.
I don't know who that is.
She's a singer.
She's a singer? Okay. Sadea? Okay, cool. So Sadea, I don't know who this is. So if it's somebody bad and I'm getting pranked, I am not held responsible for this.
Messi!
What?
Messi!
Messi? Okay, cool. I know who Messi is. So those two people, right? So, hear me out. Let's just say Messi and Sadea are in the grocery store. Can I say the name wrong? Zendaya. Okay, cool.
With a Z. Zendaya.
Okay. Philosopher stumped by high schoolers. Here's the basic idea. Zendaya and Messi are in the grocery store, right? And they come to you and be like, dude, I love you. What can I do for you? How can I sacrifice things for you? How special are you? Just work with me here. How special are you going to feel with them saying that for you?
Pretty special.
Yeah. How special are you going to feel if, your best friend just did it? You're going to feel a little special, right? But it's you're average, right? You're average. You're not Messi level cool, bro. Right? So, the basic idea here is there's this hierarchy. There's a social hierarchy that we recognize implicitly, right? And on that hierarchy, you can't go higher than God. You think Messi's cool? God's infinitely times greater on the social hierarchy, right? He's dope. But so the basic idea here is the higher you are in the hierarchy, the more the love is exuded by stepping down to do something like that. So you have an infinite God who's infinitely great, has an infinitely high place on this social hierarchy, who steps down to the lowest of love for you. And I think that's something that, at least for me, tells me I'm valuable. It tells me I matter. It tells me my suffering is not pointless. It tells me that I have hope in my suffering. It tells me that somebody at least cares. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Does anybody know what the word eschatology means? Okay. Basically, it's about the end times. Now, when I say end times, I'm not just talking about like doomsday stuff like that. I'm talking about like post, like Jesus comes back and we're celebrating Jesus with the resurrected perfect bodies, right? That's what I mean by eschatological hope here. The basic idea is here that Jesus gives us hope in our suffering. Matthew 5:11 through 12. In the Beatitudes, Jesus teaches that those who endure persecution and suffering for righteousness' sake will be rewarded in heaven. This implies the idea of future compensation for present suffering. In other words, Jesus himself finds value in your valiant, triumphant suffering in faith. Even if you're going through something and you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know of any like worldly benefit, any kind of worldly soul growth that I'm going to get out of this, there's something coming, right? 2 Corinthians 4:17, the Apostle Paul writes about how the momentary afflictions believers face in this life are producing an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison. And again, this suggests that the suffering experienced in this life has a purpose that will be surpassed. Not just like met, but it's going to surpass what you're experiencing today. In Luke 6:22 through 23, that's the last one. Jesus encourages his followers by saying, "Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and insult you, and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven." Again, another promise of a reward in heaven for your suffering. And this is the one that really amps me up. Okay? The basic idea, if you haven't picked up on it, is God is going to give us some meaning in our suffering. A perfectly good God is going to give us the narrative, give us a story, give us something that we can make sense of our suffering, not just logically speaking, but like existentially, emotionally speaking, something inside of us that fulfills us. And so this is like one of the things that really gets me. When I struggled with the problem of evil and then I realized this, I was just like, oh, I'm sold. Let's go. Tell me what to do, God. I don't care what I got to do. Right? So, Jesus provides us with meaning in our suffering. And the way I think this is really cool is because God can redeem the universe without us. Right? Yeah. He doesn't need us. But instead, what does he choose to do?
Make us part of it.
Exactly. He makes us part of it. He wants all of us to participate in this great story. You're not just a tiny, meaningless speck in this universe. No matter what anybody might tell you, you're not. Because at the end of the day, you get to participate in the greatest story that will ever be told for all of eternity. To love God and make him known. To bring about the redemption and the Great Commission. To share the gospel with all nations. Face that suffering. It's okay to feel sad in that suffering. It's okay to feel hurts. It's okay to even sometimes feel hopeless. God can take that. And what does Jesus say in those moments? He tells you, come to me. Give me that. And I promise you an eternal reward beyond all comparison if you just triumph through the suffering and fight through it with me. And so here's the basic idea. A perfect God, like I said, would meet the existential needs and broadcast that he offers their fulfillment. He's not going to just be like, he's not going to passively be like, okay, here's where they can meet their existential needs, but I'm not going to tell them this, right? He's going to broadcast that he's met these existential needs. And I'm going to say a perfect God would both fulfill the criteria of logical and emotional problems of evil. And Jesus does both, as we've just looked at. We looked at the logical side of things in the beginning. On the emotional side of things, we serve a God who's not distant. He has experienced suffering, betrayal, fear, rejection, and so on, so we can identify with him. He provided a way of redemption for us. He provided us with a moral exemplar. He provided us with the defeat of sin and death, so we can be promised a resurrection with him. And he provides us with hope and meaning. And no other religion does this. If you look at all the pagan deities, they're pagan deities. They're not the gods of the universe. They're created beings that die, are born, and they have limited powers. They're not the creators of the universe. They can't promise you anything other than momentary things that this world can offer. But after that, there's nothing. If you look at Judaism, you have to abide the law, but it's impossible to do that. So how are you in a right relationship with God? They reject this solution to the problem of evil. If you look at Islam, there's lots of things that you have to do in order to be in a right relation with God. And if you know anything about Islamic theology, you are only going to be saved just only if Allah chooses you, even if you become a Muslim. So there's a lot of things out there that don't even satisfy this logical side, but even that emotional side. And Jesus is the only one that does this. So if we remember our goal again, the building blocks to this answer are defense, theodicy, and Jesus. So when you ask, why should I follow Jesus? One of the answers, is because he's the only solution to the problem of evil, both logical and existential. And that's it.
Hey, if you're watching this, that means you watched the video all the way through, and I am tremendously thankful for that. If you find value in the work that I'm doing, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. And if you want to help me continue to make better videos and more videos in the future, please consider becoming a patron and joining me in this ministry mission. Until next time.